Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. In today's passage, Moses blesses four more of the tribes. This time he calls out Zebulun, Issachar, Gad, and Dan. These were four of the smaller tribes of Israel, and each had a less than stellar record when it came to faithfulness to Yahweh. So in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verses 18 through 22, Moses will keep his blessings short and sweet, and leave a great deal up to the imagination, in terms of the meaning of his words. While these tribes had been set apart by God and provided with an inheritance in the land, they had each proved to be unfaithful. God had every reason to judge them for their disobedience, and one day he would. But he would also prove to be faithful, eventually choosing to use them in spite of them. Their disobedience would result in the darkness of God's judgment. But ultimately, God would send the light of the world, His Son, to penetrate the darkness with the hope of salvation, by grace alone, through faith alone. And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call peoples to their mountain. There they offer right sacrifices, and they draw from the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand. And of Gad he said, Blessed be he who enlarges Gad. Gad crouches like a lion. He tears off arm and scalp. He chose the best of the land for himself, for there a commander's portion was reserved. And he came with the heads of the people. With Israel he executed the justice of the Lord, and his judgments for Israel. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's cub that leaps from Bashan. Deuteronomy 33, verses 18 through 22. Zebulun and Issachar were sons of Jacob by Leah, and their allotments of land in Canaan shared a common border. So Moses addresses these two tribes with a combined blessing. Moses refers to Zebulun going out and Issachar in your tents. It seems that one tribe would become traders, going out in ships and returning with foreign goods and profits from their journeys. Yet the tribe of Issachar would remain in their tents, living a more agrarian and settled life. But with their location between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee, they would, quote, draw from the abundance of the seas. And Zebulun, in particular, would benefit greatly from its access to Sidon. They would eventually establish commercial links to the Phoenicians and become profitable traders all along the Mediterranean coast. In his blessing of Zebulun, Jacob had prophesied of the tribe's close association with the sea. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Genesis 49, verse 13. It's important to note that the land the tribe of Zebulun occupied would become part of the region known as Galilee, and the book of Isaiah predicts that the day would come when Zebulun and its neighboring tribe, Naphtali, would experience days of darkness and despair. They, along with the other tribes of the northern kingdom, would be conquered by the Assyrians and taken into captivity. But God had good news for them. Nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali will be humbled. But there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. Isaiah 9, verses 1 through 2. Out of the land of Galilee would come the long-awaited Messiah. God would send His Son as the light of the world, piercing the darkness of sin and offering a means by which fallen mankind could be restored to a right relationship with Himself. Concerning Issachar, Jacob had foreseen his son's occupation as a laborer, working the land, and as Moses later put it, benefiting from the, quote, hidden treasures of the sand. But Jacob also predicted the future Issachar and his brothers would experience as slaves of the Assyrians. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Genesis 49, verses 14 through 15. When it came to his son Gad, Jacob had little to say. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Genesis 49, verse 19. It seems that Gad, a relatively small tribe, would find itself under constant attack by marauding bands of brigands and opportunists. We know from Judges chapter 1 that none of the tribes were successful in removing the Canaanites from the land. So there were always remnants of these enemies wandering throughout the land, wreaking havoc on unsuspecting villages and towns belonging to the Israelites. And because Gad was relatively small, they were an easy target. But Jacob predicted that the descendants of Gad would give as well as they took. Moses adds another element to his blessing of the tribe of Gad by recognizing God's blessing of them. They were awarded the best of the land, a reference to the land of Gilead on the eastern side of the Jordan. Long before the people of Israel crossed the border into Canaan, the tribes of Gad, Manasseh, and Reuben had requested to settle the rich pasture land lying outside the land of promise, and Moses gave them permission to do so, as long as they agreed to help the remaining tribes conquer and settle the land of Canaan. They did so, and were rewarded the land of Gilead as their inheritance. Moses honors them for their commitment to keep their word. He came with the heads of the people. With Israel he executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments for Israel. Deuteronomy 33, verse 21. When Jacob blessed his son Dan, he paints a rather disconcerting image of his future. He describes him as a judge of his people, but also as a serpent or poisonous snake. Dan shall judge his people, as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Genesis 49, verses 16 through 18. The book of Judges clarifies this rather conflicting image by telling us, now in those days Israel had no king, and the tribe of Dan was trying to find a place where they could settle, for they had not yet moved into the land assigned to them when the land was divided among the tribes of Israel. Judges 18, verse 1. They had been allotted land in Canaan, and while it was small in size, it was very fertile. But like all the other tribes, Dan had failed to drive out the Canaanites, and so they never fully occupied the land given to them by God. The Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. Judges 1, verse 34. So rather than obeying the command of God, they decided to search for other lands in which to settle. They sent out 5 spies who came back with a report of a possible spot for resettlement. So the 5 men went on to the town of Laish, where they noticed the people living carefree lives. Like the Sidonians, they were peaceful and secure. The people were also wealthy because their land was very fertile, and they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. Judges 18, verse 7. This news prompted the Danites to send 600 men to attack Laish and take the land as their own. But on the way, they decided to steal a Levite who was serving in the household of an Israelite named Micah. We know from the text that Micah had employed this Levite to serve as his personal priest, and that Micah and his neighbors were idolatrous. When the Danites stole the young Levite, they also took the false gods Micah worshipped, which caused he and his neighbors to chase down the Danites and beg for their return. Then with Micah's idols and his priests, the men of Dan came to the town of Laish, whose people were peaceful and secure. They attacked with swords and burned the town to the ground. There was no one to rescue the people, for they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. This happened in the valley of Beer Rahab. Then the people of the tribe of Dan rebuilt the town and lived there. They renamed the town Dan after their ancestor, Israel's son, but it had originally been called Laish. Judges 18, verses 27 through 29. Years later, God would divide the kingdom of Israel in two, creating Judah in the south and Israel in the north. The Danites would play a huge part in the eventual fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. In 1 Kings 12, verses 25 through 33, we have the account of King Jeroboam, who, fearing that the citizens of the northern kingdom would travel to Jerusalem in the south in order to worship God, he decided to erect 2 altars in the northern city of Dan. Not only that, he placed an idol of a golden calf at each location, creating his own false gods and an entire religious system of his own design. Interestingly enough, all Moses had to say about Dan was, Dan is a lion's whelp that leaps forth from Bashan. Deuteronomy 33, verse 22. Bashan was located near Laish, the town that the Danites conquered and occupied. The description of Dan as a lion's whelp or cub is intended to portray that tribe as impetuous and undisciplined. It lacked wisdom and the skills acquired by age and experience. The Danites would steal land not given to them by God. They would steal a Levite and make him their personal priest, something God had never commanded. And on top of all that, they would steal idols and set them up as their gods. Eventually, under the poor leadership of Jeroboam, they would create their own religion and erect their own altars to false gods, leading to their eventual judgment by God. Each of these tribes, Zebulun, Issachar, Gad, and Dan, had been set apart by God as his own, but they all had failed to live up to God's standards. They had proven to be unfaithful, disbelieving, and disobedient. But even their wickedness would not keep God from displaying His faithfulness. Out of the darkness of Zebulun a great light would shine. The book of John records the arrival of this great light in the form of Jesus Christ, the Son of God and the Savior of the world. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through Him, yet the world did not know Him. He came to His own, and His own people did not receive Him. But to all who did receive Him, who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. John 1, verses 9 through 13. Even though darkness reigned, the light penetrated the darkness. Even though the tribes of Israel proved unfaithful, God proved Himself to be faithful to keep His word.